All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our RFP RFQ workshop for arts administrators. My name is Erica Hill, and I'm the Community Arts Development Specialist at the Nevada Arts Council in our Carson City office. I am so excited to be here today with Megan Berner, the Arts and Cultural Manager of the City of Reno, and Mickey Sprott, Cultural Supervisor of Public Arts at Clark County Parks and Recreation, for the kickoff of our 2023-2024 Community Arts Development webinar series. We are providing this workshop because public art bids are becoming more popular across Nevada. We want to ensure that our organizations and artists are successful in their pursuits of developing and creating public art projects and programs. RFPs, or requests for proposals, and RFQs, requests for qualifications, are critical to the process of local government soliciting for public art and for other entities. Today's workshop will focus on how arts administrators can best use these requests in the pursuit of public art opportunities. In exactly a month, on November 15th, we'll be having our speakers back on this platform for a special workshop on RFQs and RFPs for artists. A few formalities before we begin. Today's workshop is recorded and will be made available to the public on our website in addition to the City of Reno and Clark County's online platforms. We will have an hour together with presentations on this subject, and then we will follow with a question and answers. Given we have enough time, those in attendees will be invited to be on, but we will not turn on your video. You may also use the Q&A function throughout the workshop, which will be answered by the speakers as they can. All supporting documents for this workshop will be linked under our videos on our website and our YouTube page. I do want to thank our speakers today wholeheartedly. Megan and Mickey are graciously donating their time today for this important topic. They are both passionate about public art and proficient in using RFPs and RFQs. I'm deeply grateful for their time and participation. And I'm also grateful for your participation here today too. You are supporting arts in Nevada. Okay, now without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to the experts who are leading this workshop today. Megan, Mickey, take it over.
Hey, everyone.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that, just to guide us through this presentation today. So I am Megan Berner. I'm the Arts and Culture Manager for the City of Reno. I have been at the city for a little over 6 years, working in our public art program and then various other things that we do over here in arts and culture, like granting programs, working with galleries. We program galleries, etc. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
And everyone, I'm Mickey Sprott. I am the Cultural Program Supervisor over the Clark County Arts Plan, or the Public Arts Office. Our program has been in existence since 2013. I came on board in 2017. Our program is funded through hotel room taxes for the most part. And we do have an art committee. So I do want to invite you all to check out our art committee. It's held on the second Tuesday of every month at 3:30, and we do it online. So thank you for having us, and I'm excited to get into these items. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So here's sort of a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We'll go over what is an RFQ versus an RFP, talk about when you might use one or the other, the elements that you'll include in these when you're soliciting public art, and then special considerations, a whole process overview, and then we have some resources too that we'll make available to you.
And I want to say too that with this training today, RFQs and RFPs are fast. There's a lot of information. And so, we're trying to go over broad scopes today. If you're diving into this and you're new and you're doing an RFQ or an RFP, as you're starting to develop, if you reach out to us, we're glad to help you on this. So we want to start with So you hear a lot, RFQ. What is RFQ? So an RFQ is a request for qualifications. So this is trying to not be so intrusive on an artist. We're asking for a few items, and then evaluators are evaluating that previous artwork to make a selection to maybe identify a handful of people to be compensated to do a proposal.
Okay, and then RFPs, or requests for proposal, are a little bit different. They actually ask an artist to create a proposal for artwork at a specific site or place, and submit that idea for a specific commission. So those are generally a little bit more work for an artist if you're asking for an actual proposal up front. There again are various times when you might use one or the other of the RFQ or the RFP. Well, we'll go over that, I think, in our next slide, but both of these are types of calls for artists.
Yeah, and so it's that flow back and forth, right? Like generic language. You can see these things could happen through what I consider an in-house call. So something that happens through my public art office. And we're facilitating the call, we're sending out the marketing and all those things, we're collecting the applications. And then the larger RFQ, RFP projects, those are run through our purchasing department. So they're run kind of at a larger level, where purchasing would be taking in all of that information.
Do you do that for public art projects, Mickey?
Yeah.
So we do not do that here. We've been able to bypass the purchasing department process for all of our public art, which has been helpful because a lot of that is a lot tougher for artists. We do use it for things like, for example, we put an RFQ out recently to update our public art master plan. That's working with a consultant group, not an artist, most likely. They have more experience, I think, with those platforms, but we do all of these through our department runs all of our calls for artists. So
yep.
You can do it different ways, depending on your city's or your town's regulations.
And that's what you're going to find in this lecture today is no one way is the right way. And RFQs and RFPs, I mean, there's so many varieties of what happens. So Megan and I are going to try to give you a taste of what we do. And it really depends on your community and your needs.
All right. So let's talk about when to use an RFQ or RFP. I think Mickey said, you can really use either of these for any project, but there are some best practices within the art world on how you do this. So an RFQ would be used when an organization or a city wants to sort of work with a smaller pool of artists to then create a specific proposal, or maybe it's selecting a single artist. And so in that case, what you would do is you would put out this request for qualifications asking for evidence of that artist's ability to create a public artwork. And then a committee would evaluate it and select either that smaller pool of artists that you're working with or that single artist. That if you choose a single artist, you're basically going to commission them for the job, so they will get paid. If you select, like the way that we're doing a process right now, we have 3 finalists coming to Reno. Each of those artists will be compensated for their time in the proposal that they create for this specific site for this artwork, regardless of whether they get selected for the commission or not.
So it ends up, in most cases, you're going to go from an RFQ and then you're going to move into an RFP. And that's the best practices. There are some times where an RFP does make sense. And it has to be well thought about on why you're going to use an RFP. You're going to look RFPs are a great way to give emerging artists the opportunity to be awarded. You're not going to have a well-experienced artist applying for RFPs pretty much ever. They're at a level where an RFQ is going to be their best bet. And then eventually they're going to get to a level where they're a kind of a direct select, or they qualify in a different type of qualification. So with an RFP, you have to think about those parameters and not ask too much from an artist. So if you were saying, recently in Vegas, there was kind of like the social media thing going on with some of the artists, and they were talking back and forth. And I don't know what company had asked this, but they had asked for a mural that it's an RFP. They wanted to see the image of the mural. They wanted a full detailed list of like what their schedule would be, list of paints they would use, all of this crazy stuff. And it's really not needed, even in an RFP, that it is overstepping the boundaries of what you're asking an artist to do. And when we look at government agencies and what we're told, you never want to make a vendor work without having a purchase order in place. So thinking that it's okay to do a proposal, you have to watch those lines.
Yeah, and I would also add, like, the way that we distinguish sometimes here at the city of Reno is on the size of a project, and also like the amount of time that we have to complete the project. So if you have an extended timeline, RFQs work great, because they take longer generally to procure a final piece of artwork than an RFP. We also, we would never use an RFP for a large scale public art project, because most of our large scale public art projects involve community engagement. And so we expect that to be part of the process before creating a proposal, so that any input from the community can be put into that final project. We do use RFPs for small scale projects, things with shorter timelines, or as Mickey said, to give emerging artists a better opportunity to be considered. So for things like, we do an annual signal box program, and we do ask for a proposal. Again, they don't have to be, a fully fleshed out, perfect proposal, but a sketch or an idea of what the artist would paint on those boxes. So that's one case where we do use RFPs.
Yeah, and with the RFQs, you can work in a way that it could be successful for emerging artists. And so that's setting up the parameters of your RFQ to encourage that. Maybe it's through the evaluation criteria. It should be also kind of signaled out just right through the document, so it's very clear to everyone involved and everyone applying who your evaluators are looking for.
Yeah, and in the case of those signal boxes, when we do an RFP for those, we do restrict it geographically. There's at the bottom of the slide some information about if you restrict the call maybe to local artists or to emerging artists, you can favor them in that way. There are some cases where you might want to restrict a call to a region or local. I do want to comment on sort of generally when we do large scale public art projects, we do not restrict it to local. And we do get questions on that from time to time. And so, why would you do a national call and not just a local call? So Americans for the Arts has some language on this, but generally public art projects are typically open to all artists to allow the widest like inclusion of artists who have experience and that are qualified to create work. You can limit the eligibility, right? But if people did that as a regular practice, then it might happen a lot more. And we always like to say, we like to train our artists or have our artists, you know, maybe enter into the public art world here, but then have opportunities all over the nation or the world. And so we like to keep ours open too. I also think that it is good for our artists to see how other artists work, and to compete, you know, at that level with everybody, because it'll only make them more equipped to do that.
That's exactly it. And, you know, there is a time where the environment becomes saturated as well. There's only so many experienced public artists within each one of our communities. And so opening up that call nationally really helps to lengthen that pool, you know, make it larger. And like Megan said, just reiterate, you know, I want to see our local artists being in other communities as well. I want the country to start seeing Nevada as a place that has, you know, fabulous artists that are bringing it, right? So we shouldn't hinder other artists coming into our areas as well. Oh, so elements of a call for artists. So they're the same for both RFQs and RFPs, right? So there is a whole list. We're going to try to go through some of these items. And this is a good timing to let you know in the chat, we have a link that's going to take you to some sample forms that you could check out. And once the recording is posted, you'll have those forms that you can download as well. So call summary. Call summary is exactly what it means. You're taking all of these kind of project descriptions and goals and all of these details and shortening it up to a couple sentences, right? So that artists are able to glance at the top and know, is this worth my time? Do I qualify? Is it a mural? Is it a sculpture? It's the simple summary. So
yeah,
project, yep, go ahead.
Sorry. I was looking at the chat because I feel like somebody maybe raised their hand, but I don't know how to do live Q&A. So if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box. Hopefully that's enabled and we can try to answer questions as we go. So the project's description is a little bit more in depth than that summary of the call. And this would have information about the site maybe, and some of this, there's some overlap, I think, in our list here of what would be included, but it's a little more in-depth description of that project. What is actually trying to be creative, like this is going to be two sculptures, you know, on the corners of X and Y streets, and we're looking for artists with public art experience, and this budget that we mentioned in the summary is going to cover all of these different things like fabrication, insurance, transportation, permitting, engineering, and a little bit about the process. We'll go into that description too.
So in Clark County, project description for us is the story. Mm-hmm. So we create a story. What's the story about the facility it's going in, or the park it's going in, or, you know, the wall that's going to be painted? So we're asking that facility story, maybe the neighborhood story, that type of thing. And then that leads into the artwork goals. And the goals are very vital for for an artist to understand what your evaluators are asking for. So they kind of are a short summary. Doesn't matter. You could have, one goal, you could have 4 goals. But they are very clear, distinct, almost evaluatable goals that later on, when they do an RFP, they do their proposal and be compensated for it. You should clearly see those goals within their design.
Yep, and so the sample that I provided, some of this stuff gets incorporated in various different places in our calls, but the artwork location description, some of that happens in the summary, but we also do a more in-depth sort of general area talking about the neighborhood. Sometimes we include like census information, and then of course just the physical practical information about the location. And then you can also include site or location plans if you have those. So for example, we recently did a mural on the side of one of our community centers, and we included a plan of the actual building so artists could see the scale, the actual scale, and what square footage we were looking at. The example that I provided for you all to look at for our Audi Boulevard project actually has site plans from the Regional Transportation Commission because they are installing the footings. And so we have all of those, mapped out as construction drawings in that one.
And then I wanted to talk a little bit about artwork location. There are different mindsets when it comes to public art and project managers on what that is. Some entities like to go with very broad, open, like, it's a park, and you identify the location. In Clark County, I prefer they kind of narrowed those scopes down to really what is being asked of the stakeholders. It's not to impede on artists' artistic ability to make those identifications, but a lot of times I'm working with architects on a park or facility plan, and an architect truly is looking at the whole global picture and is able to identify where those locations are. Now, the flip side to that, where Clark County, we would be more open on the location, is if we were bringing an artist in way in the beginning. So way before a general contractor's on a park build, when they're designing the park, if we have the fortunate ability to have an artist there sitting at the table, then of course our description is going to be a lot more loosey-goosey, and we're going to really have the artist immersed in that design process, which makes sense.
Yeah, most often we do have specific sites selected too, based on varying factors, whether it's just practicality, where we can actually physically put something, or identified by other stakeholders.
I think it's important. The other thing, sometimes people want to maybe put out a call and they're, I call it kind of throwing spaghetti on the wall. They haven't identified if it's a mural or sculpture. And I think that's a difficult place for everyone to be in. And that becomes, in my opinion, a little bit frustrating for the artists. So consider those things. If you know your evaluators are never going to choose a mural, then why put it in the call? I think that's what it comes down to, is realizing that your evaluators are going to be making these decisions. So they need to be on the same page with what you're putting in these RFQs and RFPs. If you're the one making that decision at the end of the day, then you need to think about what you're going to choose. But, you know, you have to understand those things.
Yeah, I do think specificity is always better when you're putting these things out, so artists really know what they are getting into and what they are applying for.
Which, speaking of that, is our next description is budget. So it's not just, you're not wanting to just put the total budget down. For one thing, you have to think about, are you going to hold a contingency? Is some of the money going to a general contractor? Is that artist hiring that general contractor, or is the city hiring the contractor? So there's some really deep minutia that goes into budgeting that you should understand. And lastly with it is, in your RFQ, instead of just putting a bulk 20,000, you probably should list out your milestones. When are you going to pay this artist? So they do a bit of work, they get compensated. Are they going to have enough money to buy their materials to then do the job? They need to kind of know those milestones ahead of time before they're applying for the job, so they understand what they're getting into.
That's interesting. We do not put that information in our calls. Maybe we should. We do put the whole, obviously the whole budget. Most of the time we expect artists to pay for all of the costs included there, but we do. So the way that our artwork is funded, we have various mechanisms, but our 2% for art, which comes from our capital improvement projects, it's triggered by that, actually sets aside a percentage for administration, which allows for some things. So when we bring finalists and things like that, we pay for their travel, we pay per diem, etc. Yes, having all of that, you know, we definitely specify that it's design, planning, engineering, permitting, fabrication, installation, anything to complete the project.
And Megan, to your point with the budget, how you're doing it in large sculptures, it is a little bit different, and other cities will do stuff like they're going to negotiate what that artist needs.
Yeah.
For their milestones. So
we do that in our agreements, though, is what I was going to say. Once we have an artist selected, we figure out that payment schedule. Most often what we do is like a third to a half up front, and then either half at the end, or a third, and a third, but identifying that at the point of once we've contracted somebody.
Yeah, which is, again, like we talked about, we're going to have different elements within this presentation, and no way is a right way. It's just how Reno's doing it versus Clark County's doing it.
Artist eligibility, we've called out here just as its own thing, although I think this should probably go towards the top of your call, maybe even in that summary, to say who's eligible. So this is where you would put any of those geographic restrictions, age restrictions, if you have to hire 18 and over, or like if you can't hire foreign artists, so if it has to be someone who lives and works in the US, things like that would go into that artist eligibility.
Yeah. And again, that's just so right away, an artist can open up this link, you know, they're going to open up a link, or they're going to see this call, and they can look immediately and see, okay, this is eligibility, you know, budget's clearly identified. How much is the budget? They can look at a handful of things and know, am I ready to apply for this or not?
Yeah.
Is this a good fit for me?
And we usually, if this is like a large scale public art project, within that eligibility, it'll say we're looking for artists who have done this kind of work before on this scale, have this kind of experience. So that would be part of that eligibility.
We do in Clark County too. We'll do thresholds. So if we're looking for, you know, we did a call probably year and a half, 2 years ago for a ceiling art piece. And so the discussion with the evaluators was, what is that minimal requirement that they wanted to see in the applicants? And so I think they had identified a project that was $75,000 and above. And our call was for probably like, I think 180,000 was going to the artist. So it gave them a nice threshold where it had an opportunity for artists at that caliber to move up, but our evaluators didn't have to waste their time looking at an artist that was unqualified, but more importantly, the artists that weren't qualified didn't have to waste their time. So it's really beneficial to have that information. So requirements, right? Application requirements are typically things like a letter of intent, a resume or CV, images, and then in Clark County, we require an image sheet as well. And then those are the things that our evaluators in an RFQ would be evaluating.
Yep. We basically ask for the same thing. If you're asking for a proposal, that would be part of your application requirements too. And yeah, in our system that we accept applications through, you are required to upload images generally of past work, and then also give an explanation of those images that include, your materials, size, budget, etc. And then it's important to include the selection process, I think, so artists know how they're going to be evaluated, and we can talk about maybe selection process and criteria together. But we outline who's going to be evaluating the artwork generally, not necessarily names of committee members, but we have a public art committee who's generally our first stop for applications. Often we will have stakeholders input potentially before that public art committee, or as part of, they'll join the committee specifically for evaluating applications. And then that will go to whatever their recommendations are, will go to our Arts and Culture Commission.
And in Clark County, our process is a little bit different there. Our evaluation panel is different every single time. So we have a representative from the art committee that's going to be on the panel. Then we have a representative from the district. And then we have, we're now starting to do one. We have on our webpage where anyone that wants to be an evaluator can go and sign up to be an evaluator. And so we're looking for people that maybe live in the neighborhood of where that artwork's going to go, or they have a relevant background to the call that we're asking. And then the other two spots, it really just depends. So sometimes it's the architect that's on the park build, or maybe it's in a Parks and Rec facility, and so it's a Parks and Rec staff member, or, whatever else. And then, you just start kind of building that evaluators. We hit around 5 to 7 people. So it depends on the project, and it depends on how many stakeholders really want to also be the evaluators. The other thing with selection process and criteria, not only is it good for the artists to know that those things are happening, but also you filling out this call, you want to have these things completed. So you don't want to be having the applications already sitting in your email system or in whatever program, and then now you're starting to create criteria that doesn't work for purchasing. It's really not it'd be a weird process. So everything kind of needs to be done in an RFQ, including like contracts. Probably you need to have at least your template contract understood and around. So
Yeah, and I just want to comment one more thing on the criteria. I agree. It's very important for artists to know what they're being evaluated on so that they can create an application toward that criteria. So usually some of that criteria, like if it's an RFQ, you are scoring on the past work examples, and that might include, scope, size, materials that are similar to the project that you are soliciting artists for. That letter of interest, ours often include like a project approach that incorporates community engagement, a connection to the people in place, and how they would approach that, and then how their past work has actually done that. And then the timeline, of course, is important because artists need to plan ahead. And also, for our approvals process at the city, we need to have that timeline outlined. Sometimes we're working with grant funding and that dictates some of that timeline. But I think you want to have that outlined. And so we put things like when the submissions are due, when the finalists will be selected, when they're expected to come visit the community and do community engagement, when they'll present final proposals for their artwork, and then when they'll be selected, the final person will be selected and approved by city council, and when the artwork's supposed to be installed by.
Right. And that's where everyone needs to have some movement because things happen. So with timelines, especially when we're dealing with construction, your construction timeline is going to move 100 times. So just understand that with timelines. One of the things we had in one of our projects was we knew the county wanted a grand opening of this facility in the middle of summer. And we're coming in, it was a call for a mural artist. And so in the application, in the RFQ, we spelled out very clearly that they're going to be painting in the middle of summer, that the weather is insane, 110 plus. So we pointed out some really critical things with the timeline so that the artists knew what the expectations were ahead of time.
Your brush is going to dry in mid-stroke.
It was rough. Yeah, it was rough. The artist painted, but so we also made some arrangements and made some suggestions and was very clear in the call that the artists may want to bring some buddies and that they could work at night. It was a gated area, so it was a little bit safer, that type of stuff. So he actually worked from like 9 p.m. to 4 o'clock in the morning, that type of thing, to get the painting done in what felt like a safer mode for Vegas.
And then, of course, a contact so that if artists have questions, they can find more information. And then any additional information or resources, things like work hours or an agreement. You could even attach an agreement. Sorry, what was that, Mickey?
Yeah. In Clark County, we attach, so we actually attach our contracts, and so in one case, in an RFQ for sculpture, an artist is going to have 2 different contracts. So both contracts are attached. In that first contract, which you guys could see in the attachment, that first contract actually has details about product material. It's going to have placement of the sculpture. So you either have like a concrete pad or a pedestal or this or rock fixture. So it has all the details that an artist knows. If given that job, they're going to have to complete these items to move over. And if selected as the final artist, they will move to the second contract, which is to build the public art piece. So lots of additional information for artists.
Okay, we're gonna just walk through the process quickly and then we'll be wrapping it up so we can open it up for questions here in probably like 10 minutes. So the process overview is to identify the project first, right? You have maybe a generic scope and funding. Is it a sculpture? Is it a mural? What's the scale? What's the size? What is the scope? Things like that. And that's sort of where you start.
And for Clark County, that's where our art committee makes those decisions. And that's where this project, our project gets funded through this section, this first phase. On the second phase, identify stakeholders and evaluators. There is sometimes stakeholders are evaluators, sometimes they're not. It depends on the project. So you're going to have a lot of input coming from a lot of different places, and you just kind of figure out what fits the best. So who needs to be involved? Should they be involved? How are they going to be involved? Needs to be figured out. And that could be a million different ways. That look could be different every single time, and then that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. If you're doing something in conjunction with like a new building project or something, you'd probably have stakeholders at like the contractor and architect level, and then all the way into the neighborhood around the facility or where the artwork is going to be installed, etc. I think this third step is actually kind of one of the most difficult and important in this process, is to get that input from stakeholders, evaluators. That will help you develop goals for the project, all the criteria, etc., outline that community engagement process. And there are various stages where we get input when we do our artist calls. So this is prior to creating that call, but as soon as we have finalist artists identified, we do a bunch more engagement with those stakeholders, evaluators, the neighborhood, etc. And again, it's difficult work sometimes to get everybody involved that should be involved, but really important to the project.
Yeah, and so I want to point out here, so how Megan does this portion, and she could speak more in depth on it, but how she's getting the input is she's doing community engagement then. How Clark County's getting the input is we are engaging the evaluators, those that are gonna score, and they're gonna help us develop those goals for the project. And we're really trying to bring together those evaluators and get them to agree on something, right? Be on the same page with what they're doing. But I am interested in Megan's process there.
We do both. So it is very important to have your evaluators, whoever that group is, agree on the criteria, right? The scoring criteria, because that's really what your application is going to consist of then, what you're asking those artists for. But I think that the input from the other stakeholders that are not evaluators is equally important in deciding like what the goals for the project are, etc. So
yeah, and we would do that portion, but can you just spend a second talking about your community engagement in that type of scenario?
So it varies for sure what we do. A lot of the time it is simply like making people aware of the project, and then doing like online and informal surveys where we get just sort of general input. So sometimes, for example, the mural project we just completed, we reached out to and made sure that we were targeting email lists that we had, and then social media posting posters in places where people could scan a QR code actually in the location in the neighborhood. And they were questions like, you know, how would you describe your neighborhood in 1 or 2 words? What is your favorite thing about this place? You know, this one specifically was in a park, and so there were questions that related to the park and the features of the park, and then, you know, what they would like to see in an artwork. Sort of general ideas for that initial engagement. And then after we selected an artist, that artist came and did in-person community engagement. We got various groups together to talk and have conversation, and go a little more in depth on those topics.
That's cool. I like it. Thank you.
But then what we do is we take some of that information, so how people feel about their neighborhood or the most important features and things they like about living there, and we actually put that into the artist call. So the artist has that information up front about sort of what the neighborhood is interested in, what they'd like to see.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a great addition to what Clark County's doing with the evaluators, and we're gonna try it. We're gonna do it. I'm excited. So then we get into creating the call and deciding whether that's going to be an RFQ or RFP process. And honestly, this flow in public art is constantly like this. This is what it happens. But
I simplified it a lot on this slide.
Yes, you'll know it's clear as mud. It really is. It's one of those things where in public art projects, you will know because of what is being asked, how it's being asked, what the call is. All of these things are gonna just build. So consider this whole process as kind of like you're putting in puzzle pieces, and no right or wrong way to do a puzzle piece. You're just building blocks to make your structure better for all.
Yeah, and every project is different. Like it totally depends on where it's going, the site, how much of the community gets involved, all those things. So,
and the simple thing to think about, this is a great snapshot of what it is that we're talking about today. Think about this as it truly is it's a job description. It's these artists are applying for a job. You are the employer hiring for a job. That's the simple fact of the matter. And so giving somebody up front as much detail as possible is going to make your project successful, make them comfortable in what they're doing, and it ensures that it's overall just a good fit.
cool. Okay. And then after that, of course, is the rest of the process. We weren't going to go over that today, but where you evaluate all of your applications and go through the process of creating the artwork. So we've provided some resources. I don't know if someone's having trouble with the link, but there, I think as Erica said, this will also be available on their videos page after this. If you weren't able to access it, hopefully you can after this, but there's some sample RFQs, RFPs, contracts, or agreements that we have provided. And here's our contact information. Then we are happy to just open it up for questions and conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I really appreciated how much you got into detail and then also simplified things. I loved the comments about keeping it competitive and having our artists be seen on the nation and worldwide scale. So right now what we'll do is we'll invite the attendees to join in. It won't make your video come on, but it will allow us to have an open forum for questions and answers. And then if anyone's having issues with Box, please do email me. I'll drop that into the chat too. And I do have everyone's email that attended, so we'll try to send that out that way, and it will be in the video link. So
I can stop sharing my screen.
Perfect.
everybody's got this and we can just.
So while we're waiting for people to come on, just know again that we're here to help. One of the things Clark County does is artists can send their applications to us that do a quick review. I have talented staff that are, you know, they'll do simple stuff. They're not going to judge your artwork, but they can look at your application and say, hey, you know, your letter of intent, we spell checked it and these are typos, or hey, you know, it seems like you have a big gap here in your resume, or maybe something like that. We do for our local artists, we do one-on-ones, and I encourage that. I know it takes time, and I know we're all kind of strapped for time, but it's important to be accessible, to answer questions for artists when you're sending out an RFQ like that. And don't be afraid that, you know, oh, well, I have this out, I can't talk to anybody about it. That doesn't really work. So you have to communicate with people. The only thing we do ask is when we do a call, so in Clark County, if an artist is trying to get us to review that application, that's a conflict of interest. And so we don't review their application during our application period. That's just would be weird. So a little unfair to other artists.
Yeah, we have never formally offered reviews of artist applications, but we're always happy to answer questions during the process, of course. So when people are applying for these projects, if you have any questions, there's always contact information, and we're very accessible over here too.
I believe I got everybody. So if anyone has questions, we do have a few folks in the chat. And we had a thank you for being so informative. Thank you, Arthur. And Debbie also saying thank you. Yes, this will be shared online. We will convert it into a video and post it on our YouTube. And then we'll also allow Clark County and Reno use it indefinitely, right? As long as this is relevant, we will have it up for people to use across Nevada.
And I know I see some familiar names from artists and also administrators on here. So hopefully this is helpful for those of you that are putting out calls for artists. But there is going to be another, I know Erica mentioned, but specific to artists applying for RFPs and RFQs.
That will be November 15th, same time. So exactly a month from now. And that gives it a really holistic perspective on this process. And again, thank you so much, Mickey and Megan, for donating your time to this and really providing this resource. So one of the things that this came out of is some of our calls we have with municipal art leaders, and really just trying to share how do we do this and how do we move forward as a state to get these best practices in. And like you all said, it's different across the board, right? So if you're looking to create programs like this in your community, how can you do that? Oh, we have more questions. Okay, you can all talk too. And we have some thank yous. Thank you. Okay, so I think pretty much people are done. And we might want 6 more minutes back in our lives this morning. Maybe we need to run to grab more coffee. So I just want to thank you both and thank everyone who's here today for joining. And we're really lucky. We're really lucky to be here. Thank you.
Thank you
all.
everyone.
It was fun.